This presentation will talk about assessing English language learners and will discuss some of the difficulties that exist with testing these students. It will also cover some research-based accommodations to support English language learners and protect the validity of assessments. To start with, we will talk about who English language learners are. These are students who are still developing proficiency in English. Most English language learners, or ELLs, are concentrated in the lower grades, and approximately 1 in 9 students in the US classrooms are ELL students. ELLs speak about 400 different home languages, which is a staggering number. However, around 80% of ELLs are native Spanish speakers, although it's important to remember that there are different dialects of Spanish. ELL students can be put into 4 different categories. There are newly arrived students with adequate formal schooling, newly arrived students with limited formal schooling, students exposed to 2 languages simultaneously, and long-term English learners who have spent more than 5 years in an English-speaking school. Students in each of these categories need different supports and will have different struggles with testing. The issue that I am discussing is the struggle that ELL students have with standardized testing, and I will share some accommodations later that can help alleviate some of these difficulties. When No Child Left Behind was enacted in 2002, high-stakes standardized tests became the way that states could prove they were making adequate yearly progress based on state-level performance standards established for their students. ELLs were included on the mandated subgroups whose test scores were used to determine whether schools and districts were making progress. The problem with this was that these assessments measured language proficiency to some degree and did not accurately reflect what ELL students knew. No Child Left Behind has since been replaced with the Every Child Succeeds Act, but high-stakes standardized tests are still the norm, and ELL students are still expected to take these tests. ELLs consistently score lower on content area assessments than they would on assessments given in their own language, but simply translating the test is often not enough to support these students due to a variety of factors. The Educational Testing Service published the Guidelines for the Assessment of English Language Learners in 2009. This book identified 3 categories of factors that can affect the assessment of ELL students. The first category is language factors. The second category, educational background factors, and the third category is cultural factors. First, let's talk about language factors. As I mentioned earlier, there are about 400 different languages spoken by English language learners. These students all have varying levels of English proficiency and also have varying levels of proficiency within their native language. This is where simply translating a test for a student would not be sufficient, since a student may not actually be proficient in their native language. There is also the issue of conversational English versus academic English. Students may be able to fluently converse with their peers but not understand content because the vocabulary is different. So teachers may hear students talking to their friends in the hallway in English and then be confused when a student fails a test because they don't understand what the test is asking. This is a different kind of English, and the vocabulary required to understand it is different. Because of these differences in language proficiency, test results might not be accurate and may not reflect the skills intended to be measured. The next category is educational background factors. Depending on their background, ELL students will vary in their levels of formal schooling. Students may come to the US with little to no formal schooling in any language. Some may come with some formal schooling in their native language but no exposure to English. Others may have had little exposure to English but lack the academic English skills I mentioned before. Furthermore, students will have varying degrees of exposure to standardized testing and may have never experienced a standardized assessment. They also may not be accustomed to the high-stakes, large-scale assessments that exist in schools. The third category is cultural factors. Not surprisingly, English language learners come from a wide range of cultural backgrounds. Remember the 400 different languages they speak? Because of their varying backgrounds, students may respond to test questions differently due to cultural values, beliefs, background knowledge, experiences, and socioeconomic status. Instructors and test administrators need to be aware of these differences in background and culture and be sensitive to these distinctions when assessing ELL students. The literature mentions several accommodations that are available to support English language learners. They are divided into 2 categories: direct linguistic support, and indirect linguistic supports. Direct linguistic supports are changes made to the test content, and indirect linguistic supports are changes made to the testing conditions. The table on the left shows some potential accommodations for ELLs, which we'll talk about later. These can be divided into presentation, scheduling, and setting accommodations. Presentation accommodations can include directions in first language, test items in first language, reducing the linguistic complexity of the test, providing visual support such as graphs or pictures, and providing students with glossaries or dictionaries. Scheduling accommodations could include extra time, breaks during testing, or testing over several sessions. And setting accommodations could include small groups or individual testings or separate rooms. As I mentioned, direct linguistic supports are changes made to the test content in order to support ELL students. Lenski, Ehlers, Zavala, Daniel, and Soon Erminger in 2006 summarized information about direct linguistic supports from the United States Department of Education and the Office for Civil Rights. This information included permitting students to answer orally rather than in writing, allowing a qualified bilingual professional to assist with the assessment. This may mean having someone translate questions for the student or having someone translate student answers. It also included considering offering ELLs the possibility to demonstrate reading progress and growth through group assessments, allowing students to provide responses in multiple formats, accepting a response in the student's native language if translation support systems exist in the school or community, allowing ELLs to use a bilingual dictionary in the beginning stages of their language learning experience in English, and another one is if an ELL is taking an online test, a gloss might be a good option. Glosses are underlined or highlighted words or phrases on a computer screen over which an examinee can slide his or her cursor to have a pop-up definition, translation, or visual cue in order to understand what the word or phrase means. This way, only necessary words or phrases are translated for the student, which may help maintain the validity of the test. The other category of accommodations is indirect linguistic supports, which again are changes made to the testing conditions. These supports can include responding without writing, extended time, additional breaks, modifications to the test setting, and using computers. As I mentioned before, there are also options for small group testing or individual testing, as well as testing over several testing sessions. It's important to remember that what works for one English language learner may not work for another, and that an accommodation will not be appropriate for all learners. Accommodations should be individualized. ELL students are a diverse group and have different needs based on their culture, background, and experiences.